喂，你今日飲咗未啊？
飲 orange juice？
青紅蘿蔔豬骨湯？
Coffee or tea or me？
飲橙汁？不如試下飲 Coffee Bubble Tea 啦。
Welcome to Coffee Bubble Tea， 歡迎大家收聽我哋嘅 podcast。I'm your host Samson, and today we have Joyce, Colin. So this time we have Steph back again to chat with us about language. Last time she joined us for a discussion about Chinese school. It helped us to think more about like what we learned and how we learned it, and some of our motivation when we're learning Chinese. 上一次其實傾下咧，就一傾到個 motivation 咧，其實多少少傾到個 upbringing 或者我哋個即係可能係 family 嘅 environment 啊咁樣。咁咧，所以我哋今集其實會講多啲呢樣啊咁。我返咗嚟加拿大1年多少少啦，咁開始發現有樣嘢咧，就其實好多喺度出世或者好細個，即係可能1-2歲過嚟嘅人咧，咁原來佢哋識講中文㗎。What I mean is 以前咧like when I was in high school， 咁有啲人咧，即係佢哋即係齋講英文，佢從來唔會同我講中文。但係咧，即係 later on in life I found out that they actually know a bit of Chinese 咁樣，或者識聽嘅原來咁樣係啦，即係覺得好有趣啊。而調轉翻咧，又有另外一個情況啦。近呢幾年啦，即係又多咗多翻我啲朋友，佢哋嚟到加拿大，咁佢哋嘅仔女咧都係即係小學咁樣，跟住咧。我啲 friend 就話，佢哋嚟多咗咧，而家喺屋企佢哋講英文啊，都唔點講中文咁，或者即係同佢哋一齊睇到啲中文字嘅時候咧，開始好多字真係唔記得啊咁樣。咁咧係啦，咁所以呢個即係mother tongue 我哋母語呢樣嘢咧，即係呢個 topic 其實我有陣時都諗嘅，即係係啦，即係我都好有興趣啊，咁所以咧就繼續講呢個關於學中文啊、mother tongue 啊、母語呢個 topic 啦，咁好啦，不如我問一條問題先啦。From your earliest memory, what was the place of Chinese at home? Any vague memory or 係啦，你記到任何少少嘅片段，你記得啲咩咧
？I would say that Chinese had a very important status at home. And 係因為我細個嘅時候，唔係我爸爸媽媽湊我嘛，係我媽媽湊我嘅。咁我媽媽咧，佢移民過嚟呢度咧，佢唔識講英文噶嘛。咁我係唯有即係 I think it's my first language acquisition. So I acquired Chinese from a very young age to be able to communicate with 我媽媽。So that's why there is that important status at home.
Like it's such an interesting question how you phrase it, because I feel like it's just synonymous with home. Chinese and home, like that's what the language was spoken. When I was born in Hong Kong, I think my grandparents actually spoke Taiwanese to each other. And then my parents would speak Cantonese. But then after coming, it was just me and my parents. And so it was just Cantonese until I got older and started learning English at daycare and at school.
Yeah, for me, I think Chinese also played a pretty important role. My parents didn't really speak English like that, or even if they did, it was more like my mom just speaking English. So naturally, I just had to kind of adapt and learn how to speak Chinese to them so that we could communicate. And having throughout the years, it's been me really trying to learn more Chinese so that I can translate things to help them better understand what kind of documents are they receiving, paying taxes, bills, like, the whole shebang. Like it's like I have to kind of adapt into their culture and being able to talk Chinese to them has been important and essential for that to happen. But at home, it was always just, I think, something that happened naturally for me.
So, Colin, just out of curiosity, by the way you describe it, did you learn Chinese first at home as your first language, or was it something else?
I think Chinese was definitely what I learned first.
Until you went to like school or daycare?
Yeah, until I went to daycare or school.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I'm trying to imagine the childhood home that in relation to Chinese. 咁係唔係嗱？即係好多時屋企我哋成日聽到啲乜嘢，嗰樣嘢都幾 significant 啫。咁即係例如電視 radio or conversation on the phone and things like that， 係唔係喺屋企全部都即係90%都係聽中文嘅？你哋
I would find it different between each parent. Like I know, like if I sat in my dad's car on the way to and from school, it would be like the Chinese radio. But if I sat with my mom's car, she would be listening to CBC. Like my mom would keep trying to improve her English. So even now she's always listening to CBC radio. Yeah. So I think it was different. Like with my dad, growing up, I always just spoke in Cantonese with him because I knew his English he wasn't as comfortable using English. But my mom always kind of said, whatever comfortable language you want to use with me, use it. So I think she knew at some point English would become my dominant language of expression. So she encouraged me just, keep the communication lines open with whatever language you want to use.
I think my experience is pretty much the same with Joyce. Since my mom came over to Canada when she was in high school, so her English was definitely way better than my dad's, whose English is not very good at all. So it depends on which parent I'm with. Then I have to almost like switch, frequencies and wavelengths to be able to match and speak. Well, I think resulting from that though has kind of made it so that when I am switching channels, like how in a previous episode we were talking about using like a mix match of like Cantonese and English when you're speaking. I find that that's very hard for me. Like if I'm speaking purely English, then I'm just going full blown English. But if I'm speaking Cantonese, then I find it really hard to be able to like incorporate like English words at like when I'm doing that. Like I'm either going like it's like black and white for me. Like I don't like switch like that. Like it's hard for me to do that. So yeah.
So in academic terms, what Colin you're trying to not do is code switching. So code switching is when you have a linguistic repertoire of the available languages to you. So in your brain, you have these two languages available to you to use. And then you basically use that language based on your audience and the situational context. So it's funny how you don't do that, because my studies, like my master's was about people like having to do that, like to constantly like code switch all the time.
Interesting. I didn't know that. That's cool. It must be like the rarity or outlier.
都幾唔同啊，因為中英文撈埋呢個喺香港真係都幾 common 啊。即係我啱啱呢句都已經係撈咗啦，即係我係差唔多我係冇辦法唔撈嘅，係 I have to really make an effort to stay in one language。咁
Does that mean like there are some words, certain vocabulary words that just come easier to you in one particular language than the other?
Yeah. And a lot of Hong Kong movies, they make fun of that too.
I just can't do it. It's just so hard for me.
Yeah, and anyways, I'm not gonna go into that example. 想再問落去啦，咁你哋頭先講到，其實喺屋企裏面咧，就本身最細個嘅時候咧，聽得最多或者 parents 都會係講中文嘅咁樣。咁at some points 咧就開始返學啦，返 kindergarten 啦，咁就會接觸 其他屋企以外嘅人啦，grandparents、parents 以外嘅人啦，就會開始有啲英文啦。咁我諗我冇得問你哋5歲嘅時候嘅感覺啊。I don't think I can ask you guys that.
Let me quickly ask my 5-year-old self and
I think what was important was like also being part of a bigger Chinese community and watching my parents use that language with other people who spoke Chinese, and just it was like I grew up in a church that had quite distinct groups. Like you were either the English speaking group or the Cantonese speaking group, and it was very common that the parents would be part of the Cantonese group, the kids would be part of the English group. So it was interesting having that community. I think without that larger community, it would have been a lot harder to sustain the language. You wouldn't see as much of a use for it, right? Because it's just to communicate with your family, and the content of those discussions is not always as rich and varied as the quality of conversation you might have with your peers at school. It's just a different way to use the language.
When about what age, maybe when was that you started to realize or 睇到其實我哋嘅 language 都 sort of 分咗我哋啲 group and we talk about different things and so on. When did you start realizing that?
I can't say. Probably as a teenager, much older. Like, because as a child, you just take it for granted. Our parents speak Chinese to each other because that's what they grew up speaking. We speak English to each other because that's what we grew up here speaking. But yeah, it's hard to say where the splits happened. And yeah.
What about for you, Steph and Colin? When did you guys start to realize there's this different identity or different circles that for different languages?
I think for me, I had an identity struggle when I was like 13歲、14歲，因為我係由細到大咧，我爸阿媽喺個車啊，或者係 like when they're doing like Sunday chores，佢哋係會播音樂噶嘛，同埋永遠咧都係80年代、90年代啲香港流行曲噶嘛。咁I grew up with that and I really loved it。但係去到嗰個歲數咧 at school，其他啲 like non-Chinese kids， 我記得咧 there were some bullies there and they would make fun of me for liking this type of music and not liking the mainstream what you would listen to on the other Canadian radio stations. So I remember there was this one time, like this period of time when back in high school, 我完全係唔聽 like 中文歌，我淨係集中 like to find out like what are the popular Canadian songs out there. Like that's where I felt that I had an identity struggle. But now I kind of feel like it doesn't matter anymore because who cares what the bullies say?
Yeah. When did you start feeling that I don't care anymore?
可能入咗大學咯，真係覺得我好攰啊，我唔想理其他人點諗啊，我唔理你哋點諗啦，我做翻我自己啦，即係咁樣。
Yeah. What about you, Colin?
Yeah, I think similar to Steph's sharing, I also had a pretty hard identity struggle with trying to figure out who I was as a person with bicultural like identity, right? Like being Chinese on one side, and then like also growing up in a Western society where, you know, like you go home and you're either you're going home and then you kind of switch, and then you go to school and then you're switching. So then it was like kind of hard for me to navigate that for a long time, actually. So I didn't figure that out until probably like after university, which was quite late in the game for me. But I think when I started to kind of speak English at school, and that's I went to a school that didn't have a lot of Asians to begin with. I had a couple friends who were Asian, but we never really communicated using Chinese. It was all strictly English with everyone else. So I also went through a period of bullying, of just trying to figure out like and integrate myself into that society to be kind of accepted. And in order to do that, I had to, I figured that I needed to kind of give up or at least pause that sort of like Chinese cultural identity in that time period, to be able to be like, yeah, I should, in order to fit in, talk about the same things, I need to listen to the same music, be into the same things, all that sort of stuff. And, I wasn't really even into that stuff. It was just really trying to fit in and belong during that time period.
你哋三個都有講，即係喺度 navigating these two 嗱，即係而家 to simplify it, there's sort of two circles. Probably is more complicated, and language was one of it. That language was one of the main thing that separates them. 我咁樣講, would that be accurate?
For me, it was language, culture, like not just limited to culture, but like the food I ate, the things that I was into, like that sort of thing too. So I like I said, like I was bullied for a certain period. So like even eating the foods or bringing like noodles and things that people weren't used to seeing, or having like a funky smell, like that kind of thing, right? Like that kind of put people off in terms of, judging you a bit, being like, oh, I'm not used to that. So therefore, what you're doing isn't socially acceptable, which really had an impact on me, because like you're just trying to be yourself in terms of what your parents raised you to be too, right? So then it's like, how do you how do you go home and be like, I don't want this, I just want like a sandwich, like or whatever else other people are eating, like Lunchables and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think this adjustment sort of 即係叫做喺我哋自己身上發生緊啦 but it also really impacts 即係我哋身邊我哋父母啊how they 即係 how do they 重新認識我哋咁樣，或者 how they go through with us。另外你哋記唔記得其他 were there any other situations you really remember about this sort of restructuring, remodeling, rebelling phase? 有冇 any kind of memories of that phase?
I think for me, in terms of rebelling my Chinese identity, was when I started studying the Romance languages, so Spanish and French in university, because I never went into immersion. I didn't do French immersion. I did core French. And it was hard for me to be a non-native speaker in those classes mixed with the native speakers. So during my first year and second year of university, it was a bit hard because at one point I kind of asked myself, why was I born Chinese? 即係諗返起咧，係有少少慚愧，覺得 how could I even ask myself that? 但係 as someone who was struggling academically, learning two different languages, I asked myself that question, why could I not be born French? Or why could I not be born Spanish? And then have a better advantage in learning those languages. And then, of course, I get to that point where in third year university, I'm like, I don't care anymore. That kind of.
Yeah. 好，咁係咯，我咁喺即係喺呢啲過程裏面咧，你哋嘅家人啊，佢哋點係啦？即係 were they 頭先 Joyce 有少少講過啦，即係your mom said that keep I think it was keeping communication open in whatever language. What about you guys? How did your or even relatives too, how did they take that suddenly 去到某個年紀，你係成日講英文啊，翻到嚟唔中意講中文啊等等。What was that like for your family or relatives?
Hold on, I had a thought, but then my mind just went blank. Yeah.
I know like my aunt has expressed regret that I don't speak or read or write Chinese more fluently than I do. Right? Like right now in the mental health field, having Mandarin, having like solid Chinese skills is really a plus because there's so many people who speak that language and are not as fluent in English. And so, yeah, like I do regret not being able to support this group as well as I could because I just don't have those language skills. So, yeah, I think now there is some like, oh, I wish I'd learned it more, wish I used it more.
I think in terms of support, because 因為頭先 Samson 佢係形容咧 how like during our rebellious phase we may not be like speaking Chinese at home. 但係我冇咁樣嘅 experience. Like there was that part where I only listened to English songs, 但係 like in terms of communication, 我都係會用返中文 with my parents. So maybe that's why they never really figured out that, oh, there was something wrong with Stephanie.
And like, to be honest, like I knew that if I stopped using Chinese, I just wouldn't be able to communicate with my dad and my aunt and my grandma. Like it would just mean like cutting off relationships. So it never ever crossed my mind that, oh, I should stop using Chinese.
咁 Joyce 佢其實咧，你識講中文咧，佢哋會唔會錫你多啲啊？即係譬如 like 封利是
Thankfully, there's only 2 grandkids in my on the maternal side of my family, and I know more Chinese than my brother. So no, they're like it all balances out. Like 重男輕女. Like I might speak more Chinese, but he's the boy. So
I don't think I've ever really communicated to my parents how that sort of identity crisis I was dealing with. So I don't think they even today, they don't know that's what I went through was what I went through, right? In terms of trying to navigate things. Cause, I just didn't think that they would understand because it's kind of a unique kind of situation for some of us, at least a lot of local borns who have that sort of story, I guess, behind it, where like you are you have another ethnicity and then you're also in a Western kind of living situation. So I never really like talked to them about it just because I didn't think it was really necessary, I guess.
I've got some thoughts now that we've been talking about this topic for a while. And I think like Samson, what's really cool is like, I almost feel like you're like, as a bilingual person, you're like equally skilled in both languages. You can read in both languages, speak comfortably, write in both languages. Whereas I think for me and Colin, like because we grew up, and maybe Stephanie, I don't know, but like because we grew up in Canada, we're given a bit more slack. It's almost as if you do know Chinese, it's like, wow, like that's a really great thing. When I go back to Hong Kong and like sit with someone on the tram and strike up a conversation and they find out, oh, you're from Canada. Oh, your Chinese is really good. It's almost as if they assume you won't have it. And when you do have it, it's like, wow, good for you for having that. Like I remember like as a child going to a McDonald's with my grandparents who do not speak English, and my grandma intentionally lined up in the line where there was like a Chinese looking person at the cashier, and she goes up there and she starts confidently ordering in Chinese, and the lady is like, sorry, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so like as this kid, I'm like, oh, my grandma wants like this stuff, and I'm explaining, and my grandma was devastated. She was like, how can these Chinese people not speak their own language? And I think that was actually a huge lesson for me, being like, okay, even if I work at McDonald's someday, I need to be able to take an order in Chinese.
That's funny. Yeah, I get that sometimes too. It's like people are almost surprised that like you know how to speak Chinese. It's like, oh, your Chinese is really good and you're born here. And I'm like, yeah, well, and then I explain to them the whole story. This is a pretty common occurrence actually. Like whenever I'm at a cross, meeting new people, or just a church, and you know, like I tell them, like I speak to them in English, but then I suddenly switch, and then it's almost like you see their face change.
That's code switching. You just did it, Colin.
Yeah,
you,
so
you
then
code
it's
switched.
yeah, I'll be like, I code switched. Next time I talk to somebody, and then I have to explain to them again, right? So it's a yeah. I don't know. Like, I guess people nowadays almost have this expectation that because you're born here, you might not like know how to speak Chinese. And I guess that might be true, like we were talking about for some who unfortunately don't have that opportunity to practice it very often now. But I think for me at least, I don't know how others feel, but like I think it's hard to understand why you need to know this, and then later on in life you kind of look back, at least for me now when I'm looking back, I'm like, oh, I'm so glad that I had that opportunity to be able to do that, like with my parents, and just really embrace my cultural identity as what it is, and hoping to be able to pass that on to the next generation as much as I can, I guess.
So speaking about the next generation, like I'm wondering if what you guys have like ideas about when it's time to raise your own kids, like what expectations do you have for their language learning? Would you send them to Chinese school? Would you have expectations for them to speak Chinese?
我都唔知啊，其實我冇乜 expectations 嘅，to be growing up in Canada then，即係要我有陣時我會覺得 it's a burden to have to learn your parents' language. I don't want it to become a burden for a child.
Are you, I guess, like, is there ever the fear that our cultural like identity or like our language is ever like lost if we don't continue it?
I fear that. I really do. Like, I think because my daughter I don't speak Chinese to her. Like, she speaks English very well, and now she's learning French. But like, yeah, it's a huge hole kind of in how I feel like I always wanted my children to know Chinese and learn Chinese. But yeah, it isn't turning out the way I imagined. And I know, like there's some amazing people who learn Chinese in order to teach their children Chinese. And that's not me. And yeah, like it's just learning to juggle. Like there's so many things that you want your kids to know and learn. And for me, it'll be sad that like, yeah, like she'll never be able to speak to her great grandma because just the languages are so different.
咁其實你哋覺唔覺得咧，對於 Cantonese 係好似 for the future generations 係好似冇晒希望咁啊？ Especially how even like Statistics Canada, it shows that there's fewer Cantonese speakers like every 5 years.
I think
do you
at
have
this
that
point,
negative attitude towards Cantonese?
It's not that I don't want her to learn, but I think in the overall arching scheme of like, okay, what are the life skills I need to pass on? Where do I spend time investing my time and effort in? Like, yeah, like I think the support for language learning isn't there for me at this time.
Is it limited to just Chinese though, or is it like other like languages too?
I think other
dialects.
immigrant families.
Yeah, that's just the question, I guess. I think for me, I have two options. So it's either I try my best to do as much as I can in terms of what I've been passed down to, and I need to take more of an effort to learn Chinese alongside with my children, so that I can also teach them the way that my parents taught me in what I can really do, and then I'll leave the rest of it to the teachers who can provide that support. or I find a partner and then hopefully they can just do all the work for me.
我係咁懶嘅 Colin。
I think that's very efficient.
See?
我覺得你仲有第二個方法，因為 Colin 之前講過佢喺車度咧聽好多中文歌嘅，咁所以 that's another thing you can do.
That's
Come
true
on, boy,
too.
sit down and listen to this stuff, and then you start blaring and singing while driving.
Well, if I might add, I was speaking to our previous guests from Wonder Pens, and what they say is their kids only watch TV in Mandarin.
Oh.
Yeah. So if
And they
they
can-
want to watch it, they have to learn the language.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. 係啦，咁不如最後一個問題啦。What about for you guys? Like 係啦，即係對我嚟講，即係乜嘢中文係乜嘢咧？It sometimes changes, like what its place in my heart or in my life and so on. 咁係啦，即係你哋頭先有講過係，即係可能十幾歲嘅時候個 attitude 又唔同咗啲啊，跟住到大學又點 ？So what about now? Like what's Chinese to you guys now?
Relationship, family relationship. I think without that language, just the depth of communication would be so different. So I'm grateful that even if I cannot fully express myself in Cantonese, I'm able to encourage someone trying to speak to me that, hey, use Cantonese if that's easier for you. And if I don't understand, I'll ask you. So I think I really appreciate just that basic level of oral communication.
我會用兩樣嘢去形容中文嘅。第一就係根啦 ，so my roots， 同埋第二咧就係機會 opportunities。即係呢個頭先 Samson 問個問題就係我係諗到呢兩樣嘢咯，因為係由細到大都係接觸咁嘅 culture， 接觸 TVB， 接觸80年代、90年代啲歌曲，我係覺得如果我唔識中文咧，我就根本唔可以接觸另一個世界，同埋機會點解？因為係 it's really good for networking. So as Joyce and Colin, you both were talking about how when people have that expectations, like the assumptions, and for you to be an outlier and to challenge those stereotypes for the older generations when they're like really surprised that, oh, you speak, it in a way it's kind of like it's giving hope that there are people that can challenge that stereotype that no, you guys as CBCs, you can speak Cantonese and you can communicate. So that's why I feel it's 跟同埋機會咯。
I think for me, it's about connection and relationships as well. Like I was talking about earlier, I think at some point in your life, at some point in my life, and I've only recently started to do this, is really kind of embrace what your cultural heritage and your identity is, and really just going back to understanding what that all means to you. Because when you're younger, you just kind of want to play along. You just want to fit in with your friends and everything. And for me, like I said, like that was something I had to really dig deep in my later years to understand what that all meant. And I think it's important to be proud of where you are from, your cultural heritage. You know, you were born Chinese. And in my case, I only even probably recently found out that I might be like half Vietnamese. I don't know, right? So, I mean, those are such important things to understand and love about where you're from, the food you eat, and everything that goes into making the person you are. There's no really separating out of it because it is what it is. So you might as well kind of embrace it and forget about what everyone else has to say about that if they don't agree. But it's not an easy lesson to learn because you're young, so you don't really know what that means. And even more so, I think, is the fact that for me, it's not that I fit into one particular category, but I think I'm going to be somewhere in the middle, I think, where I'm kind of both Western and Eastern. So it's kind of like my own category where I'm going to be able to find others like me and really kind of connecting with them to understand what that all means.
Yeah, so thank you to our guest and co-host. I think to borrow some of you guys' words, I think it's another layer to our identity and to how we can communicate with each other. Whether it's 無論係我哋講同一個 dialect 啊，即係廣東話又好，或者係我哋同樣people who embrace or explore our mother tongue as well. It might be, people of other ethnicity as well. We can all be people who are interested and treasure our roots. And I guess it's as our life stage, as we get older, there is some fine tuning to how we relate to other people with the same language or same background. So yeah, again, from our conversation here is be comfortable whatever phase or situation you're in, whether you're at a time that you really want to dig into so-called mainstream English speaking or culture, or maybe you're at a time that you're starting to loop 1970s Cantopop. 你開始唔介意人笑你啦，你覺得咦點解好過癮喎？呢啲嘢真係係啦咁樣，咁多謝晒幾位啦。咁其實對我嚟講，我寫中文其實幾差㗎，即係我諗即係 even in people in Hong Kong， 即係佢哋所謂又中文又叻，又英文又叻，或者可以同時講嘅中文又唔係好叻，英文又唔係好叻嘅，即係 it's another kind of struggle。but for myself, I think I do take Cantonese or Chinese language for granted in some ways, and to hear you guys talk about it， 即係你哋去中文班係真係學嘢㗎嘛？我嗰陣時去中文班係傾偈嘅啫，真係咁所以it gets me thinking about the language as well. Yeah, so 多謝晒幾位啦。咁多謝晒聽眾thanks for listening to our episode today. And yeah, who knows, maybe we'll have Steph back again later on. And yep, follow us on Instagram, subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and we'll see you again next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.